White supremacy. Does it still exist? Is it in people or in the government? Well, the editorial that I chose went over one of the biggest monuments to white supremacy in the U.S. It's from Nathan Bedford Forrest, and he is the founder of the KKK member. This editorial, Monuments to White Supremacy by Brent Staples from the New York Times, is a very well-written article, with a good argument that I agree with, but it fell short in a few places regarding its types and its abundance of evidence. So it didn't use enough variety of evidence. It didn't go over any of the specific events that the monument had on the community of Tennessee, and it only went over one Confederate monument. The author focused on only one type of evidence in this article, and using others would have made it stronger. This article was very well written, but it relied heavily on historical evidence. There were no statistics, and the timeline was out of order, which I felt like took away from the article's strength. It jumped from 1892 at first in the first paragraph, and then it moved from 2015, and then it moved from 2016, and then it jumped back to 1964 and 1969. Its evidence gave good information on Nathan Bedford Forrest Monument, but it didn't address the full issues it made. A lot of big issues about these monuments that are throughout the U.S. is the moral issue of preserving statues that honor white supremacy, says Covalli in her first paragraph in her article about these monuments. The editorial did not address any of the moral issues about the monuments, only stating that Confederate nationalists, have a hard time pronouncing that word, determined to force those repulsed by Forrest into his shadow. The only thing they said is that people living in the community didn't like it, but they didn't say anything about the actual emotional effects on the community, and the only other sign of issues in this article was that Ida B. Wells, who was a writer in 1892, was persecuted for her writing, but that has nothing to do with the monument. And that was in paragraph 1 of this editorial. The other thing they didn't mention the other issues that they didn't mention were how many monuments there are that support white supremacy. They only used one monument in this article when it is actually titled to talk about multiple. According to Architectural Digest, there are actually 718 Confederate monuments around the U.S. The article chose a good one to go over, but it needed more to support its argument, saying that the government turns its nose to a lot of the issues that these monuments are causing. Even just in Denton, quote, the committee voted 12-3 to support letting the monument remain where it stands outside the historic courthouse, end quote, by Sartor in paragraph 1, talking about the Denton monument to a former slave owner in front of the Denton courthouse on the square. This is a local issue just in our area, but this is all around the U.S. in 717 other places, and nothing other than the one in Tennessee was mentioned in this editorial. As my final point, I would like to say that in order to get their point across, the author needs more than one monument. So to sum up the points that I went over how this editorial used mostly historical evidence to argue a still very relevant topic, and it didn't specifically go over why these monuments are an issue other than the government turning its nose to the community's asks and questions, and how they only used one monument to defend its argument instead of using multiple, which I feel like would have made this editorial a lot stronger. The good things about the article, though, is how it was able to call out the Tennessee government, saying how even though before they took it down, they wanted to have a holiday celebrating the founder of the KKK member, and that was the peak of that white supremacist monument. And I think the subtle argument, I guess it wasn't really subtle, but the argument that the government is the main issue keeping these statues up is a great way to end the editorial. I agree with the article's argument saying that we need to put more action into it and we need to talk to our government and be voting on these things to make sure that no one is being persecuted by white supremacy, but I think it needed a lot more evidence to support itself. Thank you for listening.